what turned out to be my dream job, organizing wine exhibitions in China. And then also traveled in Japan, in Shanghai, in Singapore, India, and did some also events in Europe. So that was fabulous. Some years later, I met a really cool French guy who was a researcher in Verona. He moved to Brussels and we saw each other again and sparks flew, and then he said, hey, come and move to Brussels to be with me. And I'd always wanted to work for myself. So he said, come and start your own business. I did, which was great. On the one hand, I was really living my dream of wanting to set up my own business. Later that year, I realized just how difficult it is when you're doing everything on your own in a country that is not yours.
Welcome to the Taste Toast Travel podcast, Faye. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and hearing more about your story of living and traveling abroad. I was just saying before we officially started that you have such a cool background and experiences, and the more I got to know you and your story, I just knew I wanted to chat with you because again, it's very inspiring, and just the places that you have lived, and I think what you have taken away from all of those experiences and places and transitioning and just all the things I know are is something that people listening here can walk away with today. So first, just welcome to you. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited about being on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just kick this off by having you tell us all just your story of adventure, if you will. So I know that you are British by birth and then you met your husband. I want to let you tell that story. And then just, what that journey has been like for you, and then ultimately where you live now. And, again, we'll get into how all of that has helped shaped you. But yeah, where to start?
Yeah, where to start? In fact, so as my tagline says, I'm British by birth. You may hear the accent from the north of England.
Yes.
French by marriage, German by residency, and Italian at heart.
That.
Basically, I was born in the north of England, a small mining town. I went to Jersey when I was 10 years old and heard French and saw French and decided I absolutely needed to learn French. When I was 14, I went to Paris with a French exchange, and I said, I really need to live in this place. So when it came to choosing my college, I studied business with French, and I went to a university that would make sure that my third year abroad, I went to Paris, which I did. We took out cities from a hat. It was completely by chance, but
I love that.
Paris came out for me anyway. It was. I think that must have been manifestation, perhaps many
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago, before it was a thing, 30 years ago. And yeah, and so I went to Paris, and then at the end of my year in Paris, I quite randomly met a Brazilian, and he was moving to Italy, and we started seeing each other, and I graduated, and then I moved to Italy. It's funny, I think I always knew that I wanted to live abroad, not
Mhm.
because of where I come from, not because I don't love my family, which I do dearly. It's just, it was something inside of me.
Just in
I'm
you. Yeah.
happier when I'm in a place where I'm speaking a different language, where I'm challenged by a different culture every day. So I moved to Italy. I spoke a little bit of Italian. I started studying Italian in that year that I knew that I would be moving. And it's quite similar to French, so it was pretty easy to pick up. I
Mhm.
was I was teaching English as a second language there for the first 2 years. Then I did another job, and then I completely by chance again got what turned out to be my dream job, organizing wine exhibitions in China. When I got the phone call and they said, oh, we organize wine exhibitions in China, could you come for an interview? And I thought, I know nothing about wine at all. It was red or white or perhaps, rosé some days, but and
Yeah.
maybe grapes, and that was it. But I was really, really intrigued by Asia. I'd read some wild swans and things when I was in my teens. I was really intrigued by, yeah, let's go, let's do it. So I started that job organizing wine exhibitions and events across Asia. I spent quite a lot of time in China. I was in Beijing for the Olympics for a month, which was just phenomenal.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really crazy, and then also traveled in Japan, in Shanghai, in Singapore, India, and did some also events in Europe. So that was fabulous. And during that time, it was the original relationship, as always happens, was over. And some years later, I met a really cute French guy who was a researcher at in Verona. And then he moved to Brussels, and we saw each other again, and sparks flew. And then he said, "Hey, come and move to Brussels to be with me." And I'd always wanted to work for myself, so he said, "Come and start your own business. I've already got the flat. Just come." So I did, which was great. On the one hand, I was really living my dream of wanting to set up my own business. Later that year, I realized just how difficult it is when you're doing everything on your own in a country that is not yours. I was okay. I spoke French. I was studying Flemish just to do something, get my out of the house, and to get me a bit more integrated also. So that was my adventure in Belgium. I personally loved Belgium. It's reminded me so much of the north of England. Everybody's
Mm.
very quick, very open, very just fun. Really, just a fun place to be. I have a lot of Belgian friends. You could get crumpets. I don't know if you know, if your listeners will know what a crumpet is, but it
Yeah.
was like the UK, but a bit more exotic. You could watch
Yeah.
BBC One, BBC Two, buy crumpets in the supermarket, but you were surrounded by French. And the food in Brussels was
Oh,
phenomenal. So
yeah.
that was cool. I was very happy there, and I started organizing wine exhibitions or wine trade events in Belgium. Met a really nice group of people there, sommeliers, restaurant owners, wine traders. And then my husband, who then became my husband, and he got a phone call when we were on honeymoon, and they said, "Would you like to come to Germany?" And we'd never been to Germany before, really. A couple of weekends here or there. And one weekend we jumped in the car where we came down to Munich, and we thought, "Hey, this looks cool. Let's do this." And we did.
Oh
That
my God.
change was a little bit more challenging
Uh-huh.
than any other, I would say. I didn't speak a word of German. I literally, Auf Wiedersehen was
Yeah.
it. He was the German speaker, which yeah, yeah, it was tough. It was really tough moving to
German's
a
a
country.
hell of a language. It's yeah.
German is not for the faint-hearted, indeed. And it was really quite difficult to move to Germany without knowing anybody, without knowing the language. For a PR agency like myself, it was basically the end. But I just carried on. I just carried on with the little bits and pieces that I could do, developing my network. I was working with Italian wine regions, doing their press relations for various different consortios in Italy. So I was still in it, and that gave me the chance to meet more and more people. And then by 2017, I got a message asking me if I could organize a small trade event for 10 wineries from Piedmont. And I thought to myself, if I don't say yes, that's it. It's done. I've
Yeah.
got to say yes. And a friend of mine said, I can help you with some of this. He's a wine educator here, and he helped me. And we did a good event. It was a nice little event, and that was the start. And then a couple of years later, I had got contacted by Slow Wine. I don't know if you know the Slow Wine Guide. They
Okay.
produce a guide every year. They're from the slow food movement, and they
Mm.
contacted me, and they were enabled to find their agency that usually organised their annual event, and they asked me if I could do it. And I can say this now because I've now been doing it since then. So I've been done 8 editions already. But that first edition, when they contacted me and said, "We usually get 400 people to this event. Can you get 400 people to this event?"
Oh my God.
My database had 250 at the time, and
Yeah.
I thought, if I don't say yes, this is the end of my dream. So I'm going to
Oh,
say yes, and I'm going to find a way to get those 400 people there. And I did. I'm
wow.
happy to say. So yes. So I'm living in Munich. I organize wine events, but I also now do some coaching for women entrepreneurs, people who are in the same situation as me, where you can be a trailing spouse and you want to have a purpose, a sense of purpose, a reason to do something, to feel, like you have a space here, because getting a job in Germany, especially at the
Yeah.
moment, can be really quite tricky.
Hmm.
So that's what I do. I have two hats at the moment. So
Wow. Oh my gosh. And then I forgot if you mentioned you have a daughter as well. I know it's like a trilingual daughter, which is incredible. And I have this in mind because we have a 2-year-old who I also desperately want to at least be bilingual with Italian because that's kind of what my husband and I are studying and can somewhat speak, which is also incredible. And so it sounds and how old is she?
my daughter's 10.
Right.
Yeah, she's 10. She speaks English, French, and German, and
Okay.
it's an amazing skill.
Yeah.
It also is very demanding. I've said to her
Mhm.
since she was little, I know I'm really asking a lot for you. Asking you to know
Mm,
three
brain.
words for the same thing, it's tough for big people, never mind little
Yeah.
people. And it does have its challenges, and it's something that needs to be planned in advance.
Mhm.
I read a book when she was little that said that they needed 30% of their time in a language to be actively bilingual, and
Oof.
because of that, we made certain choices with her education to make sure that she was in a French speaking nursery, so that she
Yeah.
would get a bit more of that exposure. She spent 5 years in the French school so that she would get that exposure when she was really a lot younger. And then
Mhm.
we got to a point when she was 8 where I realized that she needed to go properly 100% into the German system to make sure that she feels at home and that she has the native language skills,
Mhm.
um, to make sure that she's not a foreigner in the country that she was brought up. So there are some
Right.
challenges, as I say, but it's interesting, but it needs to be well planned. But it's brilliant when it works.
And worth it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. What a story. Oh my gosh. I'm like, where do I even start? I would love to start with this initial trip to Paris that you went on. And clearly, as you were talking, I was like, it is so clear that she was so called to Paris. And I totally like to think that you manifested that for yourself. And so remind me again, how long were you in Paris specifically? Just the one school year?
Yeah, I spent my third year abroad there, so I did a 4 year university degree, and the third year was in Paris. But as I
Yeah.
say, I chose that knowing that we could go somewhere, and that Paris was one of those possibilities.
Yeah.
And then it just so happened that Paris came out of the literally the hat. I got the Paris.
Yes.
Oh, Paris! So I was really happy
So
with
cool.
that. So. Mm.
That's amazing. So take me back to that time in your life. Like, what was that experience like for you? What was it about Paris that was so I mean, it's Paris, of course. So it's not hard to imagine why someone would want to go there and study there and live there. But what did you take away from that experience? Because that's such a pivotal I also did some studying abroad in college and it's so cliche, but it really does change your life, and it really does open your horizons, and it makes you learn a lot about yourself, about other people, cultures, all the things. So, would you say that that is something that really sparked this change in you, or you kind of felt it before, and that just really reaffirmed what you were feeling, or
I felt it before, as I say. I think already from me being 10 years old and going to
you
Jersey and
just
hearing
knew?
French, I knew that I wanted to speak a second language. And then when I was
Yeah.
at school, I did French exchanges from me being 12 with a family in a town which was twinned with the town that my parents are from.
Okay.
And we got on well, and our families got on. So we always did that, Celine. And we're still in touch now. And so every year I would go to France, and I always knew that I wanted to live abroad. I probably wanted to, live in France. And then, as I say, this Paris thing came up. The year in Paris was hardcore. When I think about it, I was only 20.
Yeah.
It was the year that I was 20, 21, and it was hardcore. You have to be very streetwise when you live in Paris. A big city, lots of crazy things going on, and I think it's still exactly as it was, if not worse. So it was just crazy, really. Yeah, Paris. It's not as Emily in Paris as I think. I love watching that series and think, no, that's not what Paris was like when I was
No,
there.
a lot of
If
French people
only.
do. It's very romanticized, and I can understand why. I've been myself, but it's been a while. But absolutely, there's certain parts of Paris that are not for the faint of heart too, I think, so being very realistic, I think, with some of these places too, but those challenges too can be so eye-opening and character building, I think, in a lot of ways. So cost and
Absolutely.
benefits, I guess, but yeah.
Absolutely. And it was a nice time to actually be there, the end of the 90s. David Guetta was
Yeah.
a resident at Les Bains Douches. We were often at Les Bains Douches and
Oh my
all
gosh.
sorts of really quite iconic things where I arrived basically with a time out guide, and my friend just went through all the various different bars and nightclubs, and we just went everywhere. Buddha Bar was the thing, and yeah, now when I spoke to somebody who was in their mid-20s now just recently at a wine tasting, and I was telling her about all the places I used to go to in Paris, and she was like, oh wow, how do you know that? I was like, time out guides, like 1998, it was all in there. I was doing it all. It was a brilliant experience. Not much studying was done, I must admit.
Yeah.
I only went to university 3 times a week, but it was definitely university of lifetime.
Yes, that's a great way to think of it. Gosh, that sounds incredible. Okay, so you do the school year in Paris, and then that takes you to Verona, where I know you met your French husband. So, then you went to Brussels from there, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what was remind me of the time frame again. So you met him kind of like when you went to Verona, and then how long was it until you guys headed to
No,
Brussels?
I had
Or do I have
this Brazilian boyfriend that was the reason that I got to Verona. But
to
then I
Verona?
lived in Verona for 10 years. I was there for a long time.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, I love Verona. What was it about Verona that kinda spoke to you too?
I just love Italy, and
Yeah.
as I say, Italian at heart because really that's my place. I love the people, I love the culture, I love the language. I speak
Yeah.
it much better than I speak any other language. I even came back with an Italian accent after my 10 years there. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I also really enjoyed it because I had this amazing job and the chance to travel, which gave me the both best of both worlds because it is a
Yeah.
small city, people are doing the same thing all the time, every Sunday night in the same pizzeria with the same people. But I had that escape of traveling so much. But yeah, Italy is it's just so rich in culture,
So
food
special.
culture, everything. It's just amazing. I think don't think it's underrated. I think everybody knows how amazing Italy is, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Definitely. I have my soft spot for that too, and my husband has citizenship and everything, so yeah, we're definitely looking to get there one day, semi more permanently. It is such a special and of course, every country has its issues and has its things, but there really is something just so magical about it and the history and the culture and everything, but I definitely wanna get to the work that you do, of course, working in wine as I do, like, definitely bonded there, so I wanna touch on that. But so take me then to Brussels because, again, I hear amazing things about that. John has been to Bruges and Brussels as well and absolutely loved it. So remind me, how long were you in Brussels for then?
2 years and 3 months.
Okay, alright. And then what was it like living there compared to then maybe Paris or to Italy, and just what was that transition like?
For me, it felt like home from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I'd been traveling there for the 6 months prior to that. I was there every second weekend. I
Mhm.
had a couple of friends already there. As I say, I already spoke French, so that was all fine.
Yeah.
You can do everything also in English. English is the neutral language, let's say, because then they avoid the friction between the French speakers and the Dutch
Mhm.
speakers. So English is uh, is spoken everywhere.
Pretty
And
widely spoken, yeah.
yeah, I really really loved it. I had such a group of really fun friends in
Yeah.
Brussels, like really quirky people. As I say, the food is amazing. It's not actually that far away from the UK. I could catch
Yeah.
the train home rather than fly, which was just amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Belgium, and Brussels itself is nice and quirky. It has got some hot spots, let's say, but it's got amazing food. It felt like a city. It was a bit more vibrant than Verona was,
Mhm.
and but still small enough, not the craziness that Paris can be.
Maybe
So
Paris had, right.
yeah, exactly. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I want to sidebar to China, and hopefully I'm going somewhat in order here, but I'd love to talk about China really quick because talk about a transition and talk about, a bit of a culture shock. So, remind me again, how long were you in China for specifically?
So I was traveling to China when I had the job between 2004 and 2010. So when I
Okay.
lived in Verona, I was
In
traveling
Verona.
very to China. Yeah.
Okay, so fairly consistently?
Yeah, a couple of times a year I will be there. And
Okay.
then, as I say, I was there for a month for the Olympics in
Yeah.
2008. Yeah.
So cool. And then you did some traveling in and around there. I think you mentioned you went to Japan and some other places as well.
Still for wine events. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so walk me through that and what, you took away from that travel, that work, that culture, again being so quite different than Europe. What was that like for you?
I really loved China. The first time I went to China was in November 2004,
Mhm.
and I can remember that we had a proper exhibition, so we had stand fitters, and these stand fitters came from rural areas, and they would just stare at me. And somebody said to me, the bosses of the company of the stand fitters, they were actually Singaporean, and they said to me they've just not seen Western women before.
Wow.
25-year-old British girl that was wandering around
Yeah.
this exhibition centre in Shanghai, and they'd just not seen anybody like me before. And at that time, you could also find small pockets of Shanghai, which were the old city. I remember
Yeah.
there was one Sunday where I went walking, and in China, I never ever felt threatened at all.
Mhm.
It wasn't Paris. Strangely enough, it was Shanghai, and I remember walking down in this really small road, and there was a chair, one of the sort of fold out metal chairs on the side of the pavement, and somebody was cutting hair, and there was also like a plastic bowl that somebody was doing their washing their dishes in on the side of the road.
Oh my
All
gosh.
things like this that you just don't see anymore. And people were going around on lots of bicycles and scooters and things, not so many cars. The
Mhm.
last time I went to China some years ago, of course, it's all changed. But at the
Yeah.
time, I found China really interesting. Also, one of the evenings that I was in Casa Italia, so the Italian Olympic house during the Beijing Olympics, I remember that we came out, and it was a exhibition center in the northwest of Beijing. And in front of it, there was a square. And there was an evening there where there were couples that were dancing together. Like somebody got a ghetto blaster, sort of old ghetto blaster thing, and they got this music on, and all these couples were dancing, and they would do that sort of once a week. It was a fixed appointment for them dancing, and I do like to sort of study cultures and see how they interact between them. And I like that, just as I like very often you'll see couples in China walking down the street and the man's got the woman's bag over his shoulder. I think
Uh-huh.
that's a really sweet indication of how they share the tasks and how things are different in China compared to, I can't imagine my husband saying, okay, I'll take your handbag, and walking down the street with his
Right.
with my handbag over his shoulder. That's something that we don't do. And these little things that I think are really interesting to pick up on when you go traveling.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of my favorite parts, and I think that's one of the things that's for us, it's like it's very humbling, but it's very eye-opening, and I love that we can all of these places we might go, like, we take little parts of them with us and then, like, can kind of apply little I don't know whether it's like cultural things or just those perspectives into our life, whether we even realize we're doing it or not. And it's such a beautiful gift, I think, that traveling and living abroad especially and gives us. But that is so cool. Yeah, I was just curious about that, again, even though you were maybe not living there and just traveling there and whatever, but like still, I mean, you land there and again, culture shock. So yeah. So talk to me now about being in Munich. So do I have this right? So you went from then Brussels to Munich then, correct? Okay,
Yes,
perfect. So
yes.
and you're there now. So okay, so I know it sounds like the transition at least like with the language was a little tricky. How is that for you now? And then just also how you like Munich and Germany in general. Of course, I hear wonderful things. I have not been to Germany yet, so it's on my list, but
Yes, I think Germany is one of those perhaps underrated places that people think about the Oktoberfest and that's about it. But it's really worth exploring. Although
yeah.
having said that, I've not done a ton of exploration myself. I'm every first opportunity I'm back to Italy, but
Yeah.
the quality of life that we have in Germany, especially this part of Germany, is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Munich is a really beautiful city. One of the reasons that we stay here is because it's so safe. Children
Mhm.
walk to school on their own from them being 6 years old. That's the
Wow.
norm. Exactly.
The US could never now. Oh my gosh, we're yeah.
That's it. And I think that there's something there to say also about media and its role in how we let media shape
Mm.
our expectations and fears, because
Mhm.
it's not that nothing ever happens in Germany. Like, let's be sure,
Yeah,
things also happen,
of
unpleasant
course.
things also happen in Munich. The thing is that the media doesn't make a big thing about it. They're not here trying to terrorize people. It's like, okay, that happened. We'll get that sorted, moving on. People don't
Mhm.
want to change their way of living because
Mhm.
not great things happen. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect to the German culture, in fact, for that. The first evening that I was here in Munich 13 years ago now, and just a couple of days, going to be 13 years that we've been here. I
Wow.
remember I went out to a social evening to meet some people, and on my way home, I got on the U-Bahn. It was about 11:30, and there was an older lady, like a really older lady, like somebody's grandma, sort of older lady on the U-Bahn. And I thought, wow, if she can be out at 11:30 at night, then it must be pretty safe. And
Right.
effectively, you can, wherever you go, I've never ever felt unsafe or threatened anywhere in Munich.
Yeah.
And we can be sort of also lulled into a false sense of security here because it
Mm.
feels like a village. Munich does not feel like a big city. There are
Yeah.
other parts of Germany that, yeah, definitely city. Get your city eyes on. Be careful, but you don't ever need to do that in Munich. It's just not.
Wow.
It's just not the vibe. It's really grown a lot. It's one of the cities that's growing the most. In fact, I had a conversation earlier with my husband about how Munich is the Silicon Valley of Germany.
Yeah.
There are a lot of tech startups here. There's been a lot of development, a lot of housing development. We have increased about 30,000 people per year in Munich. So yeah, yeah.
That's significant. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And the really cool thing is that the city planning is keeping up with that. They expand the public transport, they're building new schools, they're keeping up with that. Yeah, okay, it can be tricky to get a doctor's appointment, but I just called up for the dentist and I'm in tomorrow morning, no problem. Not the same problems that we might have in other countries. So they're
Yeah.
doing a good job. They are really doing a good job. Munich's brilliant place to live. We've got really good high speed train links everywhere. I catch the train down to Verona, 5.5 hours, and I'm in Verona. And then also one of the biggest airports in Europe. So it's good. Well,
Yeah.
if ever in those moments where we've thought, what are we doing here? We actually sit down and we can't think of anywhere that we would prefer to be than here. So
Yeah, I love that so much. I've talked to a lot of people who say similar things about wherever they choose to be, and but I've heard such great things about Germany for that reason, and Munich specifically. Although I don't think I've spoken to anyone on the podcast who lives in Munich specifically, but I have spoken to a couple other people that are in Germany, and they have wonderful things to say about it. And it's so nice that it sounds like they are keeping up with the expansion, at least in the US, that is not always the case. And you touched on some other great things too in terms of like the safety and what society makes of things like that, and just yeah, they have their head on straight over there is what it it sounds like at least now. So that's amazing. So it sounds like that transition has been maybe a little rough at first again, maybe in terms of the language barrier, but are you I'm sorry if you maybe mentioned this already. Are you actively studying German now? Have you picked up on it and like how has that been going?
I did my B1 exam 5 years after we arrived. I've
Okay.
studied B2, and my philosophy is if I can speak, I'm good. If you could understand what I'm saying, we're good. For many people, it makes their ears bleed how I speak German. But, I might say das instead of der or dem or whatever. But, just provided I
You're
can get my
trying.
point. Exactly. Provided I get my point across. I get so many people that say to me, "Oh, but your German's great," and I go, "Yeah, but there's so many people that think it's not, especially like my daughter's German teacher, for example."
Oh
But
gosh.
I it's a really tough language, and it
It
comes
is.
from listening. And un, unlike in Italy, where I was surrounded by Italian
Yeah.
all day, every day, and my that's how I learned Italian, because I know what sounds right. And I did also study some of the grammar, but I've only effectively had 5 Italian lessons in my life. But German, I just don't have that exposure to hear if they speak German like I do. So
Yes.
it's phased German, but I get by. I get by.
Yes, that's the important part, right? At least you're trying to assimilate and to
Yeah.
and to do that. That's amazing. Okay, I definitely want to touch on your experience in the wine world. How can we not? Both of us working in this industry. So you again have clearly been working in with wine for a long time. So this whole time, I know you mentioned that you would specifically promote Italian wines, it sounds like now. It was always Italian wine? I know you mentioned Piemonte earlier. Were there other areas? Can you just like walk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, basically, when I started my own business in at the beginning of 2011, I started organizing events for Italian wine regions, because that's where I had my contacts, and it's basically
Mm.
carried on like that. The main customers that I work with now at Slow Wine, for example, I just did the presentation of Slow Wine here in Munich at the end of January, and I also work quite a lot with the Consorzio Chianti Classico.
Very
So
cool. Okay.
the Gallo Nero, they're brilliant. We've done a lot of things together. I first started working with them in 2019, and then COVID happened, and Quaranvino happened. I jumped on the online wine dinners very early on in COVID, and that gave me the credibility then to go to my trade contacts. They came to me saying, "Hey, Faye, what can you do for us?" So then I was just like,
Yeah.
mind were working out what I could do. So I did online B2Bs for them. I did online seminars for them. We did all sorts of things. But yeah, so that's still going on. It's just that it's a bit up and down. It's going to be a really tricky time for the wine industry, I think, over the next 3 years or so.
Yes, I was gonna bring that up. It's tricky now. I mean, we're seeing it specific, and I speak to the California wine industry. It's tricky, and the companies I've worked for, who do have international brands or just wineries or not, the international market, especially once the tariffs went up last year, there's a lot that came with that, and that's been difficult. So yeah, it's a little bit of a tough time to be in the wine industry, and there's so many factors to that. But you've seen that and experienced that where you are as
Absolutely.
well?
Yeah,
Yeah. Feels like
absolutely.
no one's immune to it right now.
No, nobody's immune to it, but it also presents some great opportunities, I think, for wineries. There will be
Mhm.
some that are going to be, are not going to survive this. That's the truth, that we just produce too much wine for the demand that is there.
Hmm.
But for the wineries that are able to really get clear on their branding, get clear on their strategy, their story, and how that relates to consumers nowadays who are looking to understand more. Actually, people are drinking less, but they're drinking better. And they're
Yes.
drinking more invested in
Yeah.
what it is that they're drinking, which, I think I did a LinkedIn post about this not long ago, saying we've actually got to a point which is where the wine producers wanted to be. They wanted people to be interested in
Yeah.
what they were doing. So
Definitely, yeah. I'm just curious, just again, in terms of like Europe versus kind of how the US is, a rise in like non-alcoholic drinks or like how has that been there? This is more just a question for me, just out of curiosity.
I think this is like super interesting. I just by chance ended up at the first alcohol-free drinks festival in Munich, which was held at the beginning of September last
Okay.
year. And that was just by chance we happened to be in town. It was a strange time because it was actually during the summer school holidays. And we went there and we found some really, really interesting things. Some
Mhm.
kombuchas that I'd not tried, like really dry, really good for food pairing, all sorts of things. Like the alcohol-free wines were the ones that were perhaps less impressive than
Mhm.
the complete other alternatives. We had
Yeah.
some sparkling teas and various infusions, all sorts of things. And I also did a LinkedIn post on this at the beginning of September last year that got some attention because I said, people are worried about alcohol-free wines or de-alcoholized wines. The wine
Mhm.
business is saying, oh no, but they're terrible. Nobody's going to be drinking those. I don't want to know anything about them. When actually there's a whole body of alternatives to wine that are really good and that are
Yeah.
really excellent for food pairing. And
Mhm.
I think we're in a tricky situation because consumers are really interested in these things. There's like serious interest in this. In fact, most people at the festival were consumers. They weren't trade.
Mm.
And it feels like the sommeliers and the, F&B directors are such big wine geeks that there's this sort of sense of disloyalty if they even contemplate any of these things. But the
Yeah.
problem is, if you want to keep hospitality in business, you've got to adapt your drinks offering to what your customers want to pay for. Because when they're not buying wine, you've
Yeah.
lost so much revenue. But there's so many of these things that they would be prepared to pay for. So
Yeah.
please learn about them and buy them to keep your own business going forward.
Yeah.
So that's a bit my take on it. As I say, we have this moment, and so many days are very wine focused, but now it's not just wine that people want to drink here. There's so many other things, and
Definitely. Yeah, and I know, the younger generations, like the Gen Z, I'm a millennial as well, but I'm kinda somewhere in the middle. But I'm also we're so jaded working in this wine industry because we actually don't drink wine as much as you would. Everyone's like, "Oh, you must be at wineries all the time and drinking wine all the time." I'm like, "I really don't, to be honest with you." But, there's this whole thing of like, they're drinking less too, and, I see some, at least very much in the US, I don't wanna speak for Europe, but, like, I see a lot of, statistics and studies and things coming out. And yeah, there's definitely like a drinking less, but I think you hit on such an important point, and we could talk about this all day probably. So we can wrap this part up here. But I think there's such an intentionality in what people are going to drink if they're going to drink at all. And I know like what the brand represents and stands for, and sustainability is a big piece of that here and things like that. So it's just more things to consider, but I don't know that it's like these younger generations, like, yes, maybe they're just completely not drinking or that's varied, but it's also, a very saturated market. Like there's so many considerations to what's going on in the wine industry right now. But
yeah. But I don't think that people are just going to stop drinking wine. I think the whole sort
right.
of cheap to what we like in Europe, we can get we can get bottles of wine for 2 or 3 euros. That whole fascia,
Yeah.
that's disappearing, which is not a bad thing. We don't need
Mhm.
that fascia of wine.
Yeah.
So as I say, there will be some opportunities. I did a wine tasting with a group of 25, 26-year-olds a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago, and that was eye-opening. But they were very much into wine, and oh yes, and they wanted to know everything, and they bought
Yeah.
some at the end of it. They're not buying a ton. This is the
Right.
difference. They don't have the money to, go home with a carton, but they will
Exactly.
buy a bottle. So
Yes.
if they're buying a bottle, then we're okay. We're still in
Then you make
business.
progress. It's not right? We're not killing the wine industry. Like, we actually do care. Yeah, that's such a great point. Okay, I also just want to, as we slowly start to wrap up, I want to talk about your work working with other female entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general. And I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that. And also, I'm curious about that part of your business, but also in the context of just starting a business abroad and just what that is like and maybe some considerations, because I think that can be overwhelming for people, but in order a lot of people that might listen to this podcast, want to move abroad or have interest in being an entrepreneur and maybe starting something perhaps in a different country, but might be a little intimidated or they're like, "I'm not sure how." So, can you just shed some light, of course, on your work, but then just any word of wisdom or advice or guidance that you might have for someone who is looking to maybe start a business in another country and how that has been for you? Because I'm sure it has been a process at times.
It has indeed, yeah. There was I saw a video just the other day, in fact, about starting a business, and somebody was saying, "Oh, I want to do something that with one of my passions." And whoever it was commentating on it said, "So you shouldn't start a business for your passion. You should start a business from where you're good at, what your talents are. What are you really good at?" And I thought this was a really interesting take and
Was
completely the
that
truth.
was that Reese Witherspoon by any chance? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I saw that too. Okay,
Yeah,
I thought that was such a hot take. I was like,
yeah,
"Okay, let me process that." Yes, sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
that was
yeah.
that's funny. Yep, saw that too.
Yeah, that's it. It's like also in the wine business, people get into the wine business because they love wine, not because they're capable of, selling it or
Right.
communicating about it. It's just, oh, I just love wine. And I think that's it. I think when we're starting a business, we've got to really start from what is it that we're really good at? Because when we're really
Mhm.
good at something, then that will make us happy and that will bring us some money rather than trying to, push the boulder up the hill,
Yeah.
and start from there. What do people actually trust me with
Mm.
or to do now? And
Yeah.
how can I make a business out of that? So yeah, it can be really difficult when you start thinking about running a business. There's so many things to think about. In Germany, there's also a certain level of bureaucracy, I think everywhere. But here
Mhm.
in particular, they really want you to run a business if you're able to make a living as if you were working out of it. It's
Mm,
not
mhm.
it's not a culture that's set up for entrepreneurs to just, give it a try and go. It's like, no, you must
Yeah.
have a plan and you
Wow,
must
okay.
make sure it's a plan that can work.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think, at the moment we're just bombarded by everybody on Instagram telling us that they've got the silver bullet to give us 10,000 followers in a
Oh,
month, and
yep.
this and that and 10K months everywhere. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on people who are thinking about starting their own business. And the actual honest answer is that it's a long, hard slog. You have to just carry on going. And I think Stephen Bartlett says business is really boring. Growing a business is really boring. You've got to work out the things that you need to do to grow it, and then you've just got to carry on doing those.
Yeah.
And that's where I come in with entrepreneurs that are looking to do their business. And I work with women in particular that have ideas, that have started their own business, that tried to do it themselves, and then they realize that actually they could do with a hand. They need somebody to keep them accountable, but above all, sort of breaking down what needs to be done and understanding the priorities,
Mhm.
and then breaking it down into very clear reasons of why we're doing this before we're doing that. Do I need a
Right.
website? No. Do I need a logo? No. First of all, you
Mm.
need to be clear on what it is that you're doing, and all that stuff can come later. Do I need to
Yeah.
invest in this? No. Just Start at the beginning, test, 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 refine, listen, and you'll get there if you really got clear on what your value proposition is. So
Yes, great, great advice. I know I've seen that so many times. I myself was there, even with this podcast and all the things like you get the logo, you get the website, because that's all very exciting. It makes it feel very real.
yeah,
But I think a lot of people miss the very important steps of establishing the meat, the bones, the foundation, whatever you want to call it, of
yeah,
the business and then doing it in a foreign country and everything too. There's so many considerations and learnings and things that you have to take into account that you would maybe have to in your home country too, but like you're just talk about learning the hard way along the way. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
maybe exhausting, but worth it, I would imagine. And a lot of, if you're really building your dream life, kind of depending on what
Absolutely.
you're doing.
And now in Munich, I have a community called the Women Entrepreneurs of Munich that I've been running with other people since 2019. So we've got a nice community now. And in fact, I'm hosting a business breakfast on Wednesday where we come together about 15 women and we talk about what's going on in our business and we brainstorm. And
Yeah.
I'm really happy to have created that sort of community where we're all in it together. We can ask for support. It's really, really important when you're building a business to have that.
Yes, the networking, the finding a community, having a mentor, all of that. Yeah, so, so important. Faye, this was such a wonderful conversation. First of all, I just loved getting to hear your story and all of the amazing countries that you have been to. I can only begin to imagine what that has added to your life and your daughter's life and just all the things. And it's one of the things I love about having people like you on this podcast is, it really does leave us and everyone here listening feeling, so inspired and kind of just take that next step like, oh, I could maybe do this too if I really put my mind to it, right? And I have a plan and all the things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you again so much for your time today. And where can people find you, potentially work with you, all the things?
So on Instagram, I'm at Faye underscore Cardwell, Cardwell, and I have my trade website, which is fayecardwell.com. And as of today, I have also fayecardwellcoaching.com, which is my services for female entrepreneurs.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, that will all be linked in the show notes. Faye, thank you again so much for coming on, sharing your story and expertise and experience with us. I really appreciate it.